Greetings. Today I'd like to talk about in this serial murder video, victims. In your textbook, Serial Murders and Their Victims, Professor Hickey's textbook, this is under Chapter 10, Victims. And I think what we're going to think about throughout this chapter will be patterns, clusters, patterns, and trying to put into perspective the theories that we have studied to understand the victimization process. First, we would ask the question, are certain groups of people at greater risk for being victims of serial murder than others? And I think the answer would be yes, based on a lot of the studies that we've looked at throughout the course. Your author does an excellent job updating the more recent research, the 2004 to 2011 study looking at victims, offenders that have been murdered by serial killers. The average number of victims per offender is 4.5 to 5.4. So, you're looking around 5 there basically. The male victims only 22%, the female victims only 46%, and male and female victims 32%, at least one male victim 54%, and at least one female victim 78%. Looking at adult victims only 91%, and at least one adult victim 98%. Child victim only 9%. And looking at these numbers, again, you want to start trying to put things into perspective, realizing that there's a diversity of targets that serial killers will seek out. But there are also some patterns that we begin to see emerge. For example, if we look at the method of killing, shooting only 31%, strangling only 26%, stabbing only 8%, beating or blunt force only 7%, poison 2%. A combination of methods 25%. There's also some variation when we start looking at whether the victims were killed within the same year or in a certain time period. Also, we begin to see that the way that we define serial murder relates to how we make sense of this phenomena, how we collect data and statistics, and how we conduct our research. There's also different types of mobility, and your author talks about mobility typologies. For example, the traveling serial killer, the local killer who remains in a certain state or a city to seek out victims, and then the place specific who murder within a specific place, for example, in a hospital or in their own home. Still, there's a much greater risk of being a victim of a domestic homicide or killing or victims of other violent crimes than being killed by a serial killer. But we'll see that there's a lot of debate on the estimation of victims and serial killers that are operating at any particular time. We certainly need to focus more attention on the victim-offender relationships. At high risk are young women who are alone, and that seems to be a primary target of serial killers. And we'll see that some occupations are at greater risk for being victims of serial killers as well. But of course, don't forget the possibility of the serial killers operating in facilities such as hospitals or nursing homes and so forth. And also realize that what may be reported in the press may be a case that's very atypical. It seems that the press likes to report and dramatize crimes, certain types of crimes, and that may give us a very different view than what is going on in the general population. Your author also does a good job of summarizing some of the research related to children that are abducted or missing, and the different types of or the typologies of missing and murdered children, and how we begin to classify those, such as runaways, parental abductions, relative abductions, discarded children, disposable children, stranger abductions, abbreviated abductions, aborted abductions. And one of the things that we need to recognize is how important it is in any child abduction case that that it is reported immediately. And your author points out that around 75% of child abduction murder victims are killed within 2 or 3 hours of being abducted. So that's something that is very unfortunate as a statistic, but also very important to look at how important an extremely rapid response is to any abduction. If we look at some of the research on child abductions and murders, we can see that there's a variety of motivating factors, and there have been many agencies that have worked very hard to come up with better methods of preventing child abductions and also tracing children and rescuing children in a safe manner. Think about the introduction of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I don't know if they still have these children's pictures on milk cartons, but certainly when I was much younger, I remember every time I buy half gallon of milk, there would be pictures of missing children and how to report it. I remember in advertisements in newspapers I'd see that often. But now we have greater technology, so I may see, or you may see, for example, in your social media, people may post information about missing children or missing adults for that matter as well. Certainly the Amber Alert program has been helpful, and the very useful feature of that Amber Alert program is the immediacy in a particular location, and having just literally, if it gets out to thousands of people, you have thousands of eyes that are looking for something. And so your author gives some very useful information about these organizations and about how they can be contacted and how one can obtain further information. Certainly, for example, looking at the cyber tip line and looking at the huge problem that is present globally of the child sex tourism industry, and also child prostitution, and the human trafficking problem is something that needs much more research and needs really a international intervention and prevention strategy. Prostitutes are at much higher risk for victimization for serial murder, and a lot of that probably has to do with some of the sexual motivating factors of a serial killer, and also the situation of prostitutes being least likely to, when they're killed or go missing, to be reported to the police. So they may, people may not even know who these individuals are, and certainly working in an area where there's other crimes occurring, this may put them at greater risk for a variety of victimizations, but certainly we've seen that serial murder becomes a greater risk. And I'll discuss in another video Quinette's work on the missing. In other words, missing persons who were never reported as missing or could have been victims of serial murder. There's also a section on gay men, and you can read over that. And then there's also some additional information related to different movies and different websites that are on the PowerPoint. And this wraps up this video. Thank you.